Hello, and thank you for joining us for another Wellness Wednesday. As you know, we have spent this last month of February discussing Black history, and we have engaged in some very important conversations, some difficult conversations, and we are very excited to be joined by 5 new faces today to continue our conversation about Black history and capping off this month with discussions about Black excellence, achievement, and where do we go from here. As you know, our goals at the Classical Academies are to create students who are successful thinkers, achievers, and communicators, and we are really looking forward to the final installment in our Black History Month conversations.
Thank you so much, Jessica. So as we continue this, we have, like we said, 5 new faces, some from a group Upstanders, and then of course, Dr. Willis. And we are so honored to have all of you with us today as we continue this conversation. And so, Dr. Willis, would you give us a little bit about yourself?
Of course, sure, no problem. Hello to everyone. I am honored to be here. My name is Dr. Darlene V. Willis, and I use that V because I'm named after my grandmother, her middle name, and I carry it well and in my heart since she's no longer with us. But I'm so glad to be here with you all. I am the co-founder and executive director for Concerned Parents Alliance College Bound Programs, and the newly created group, the Willis Group, LLC, and glad to be the president and CEO of it. And I empower scholars and their families around the country how to take back your household for parents and family responsible adults and ensure your child has the choice of attending college. In addition, I work with clients on racial equity and inclusion. I want to make sure that our voice is being heard out there. And that's a little, you'll learn more about me as I keep going, but I'm a native Oakland, member of the Bay Area, born and raised in Oakland. And I just love doing what I do. I'm a retired educator. And as someone said earlier, well, you'll hear from the person, you work more, even retired. So I'm excited. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, thank you. And can someone from Upstanders just give us kind of a synopsis of what you do? What is Upstanders?
I can jump in.
Yep.
My name is Jewel Adriana Copeland, and I am a teacher in the community. I've been teaching for 16 years, and I teach social studies, and I am part of the equity team that my school is a part of that deals with a variety of issues. And at that point, I started working with the San Diego County Office of Ed and met Kirsten Grimm. And during COVID and with the numerous protests that were coming out, Kirsten started contacting members who had gone through equity training and people that she had met across the years, either by going to school with or just working out and being a person in her own community. And she brought us all together, white and Black, and started posing questions and conversations and really getting us to not only build our stamina for conversations about discrimination, but also to empower us to do our part. And PART is an acronym for publicly acknowledge, reflect, and take action. So we meet once a week in order to do our part, in order to educate each other, in order to push each other's boundaries, reflect, become better, and go out into the world and make our communities better as well.
Love it. Thank you.
Just to reiterate, we're so grateful to have all of you here. Thank you for taking the time out of your days to do this with us and share your insights with our students. So just to start off the conversation, I'd like to ask, what do you want students to know about African American achievements, and who are some significant or prominent Black people throughout history or even currently that our students may not be familiar with? Dr. Willis, maybe we could start with you.
You know what? There is so much to learn about Black history. I think when we start thinking about the great achievements that we've made, I know many times we tend to default to Dr. Martin Luther King, Dr. Maya Angelou, Rosa Parks, and they are wonderful. They are definitely wonderful heroes and sheroes, Black historical figures, and really fantastic. But I like focusing on sort of the little to unknown. Or if you utilize those three, then absolutely go deeper with them. So for example, with Dr. Martin Luther King, instead of focusing on the I have a dream speech, look at the letter from the Birmingham jails and what that means and how it applies to today. There are people like Fannie Lou Hamer, an unknown shero, because remember, not everybody makes the headlines. Not everybody makes the front page, right? So we want to focus on those that are very important. So Fannie Lou Hamer, who was the civil rights activist, voting rights advocate who said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. From Hattiesburg, Mississippi, just outstanding. There's the Robert Smalls of the world and Bain Rustin, I'm trying to think, Bessie Coleman. You don't hear about these individuals who have made amazing contributions because they're sort of overshadowed. And the other thing I would also say is that taking this information, I applaud you all for celebrating Black History Month at Classical Academy, but I want to push you a little further to not just celebrate it in Black History Month, but to celebrate it throughout the year. And the way to do that is to incorporate it into your lesson plans, into your curriculums. So that's what I'm standing for. That's why I'd say looking at the past. When you look at the present, and tell me if we're there yet and if I'm jumping ahead, because I can slow it down so my colleagues can have some answers too.
I mean, yeah, does anyone else have any other people that they want to throw out before we move to the present?
Oh, absolutely. Ms. Love, you can go ahead. I'll come after you.
I'll defer. I'm overwhelmed by all these powerful women in the room. So if I step back a little bit, step on a toe, you can let me know, okay? But go ahead, Ms. Copeland.
One thing that I like to do in my classroom is to emphasize what Dr. Willis said so beautifully, which is that Black history is American history, right? And we really need to remember that, especially in a social studies curriculum, social studies is inherently social justice. And very often we study what we call political revolutions, which change who is in charge of government. But really, social revolutions are the things we remember because that changes society and it changes our lives. And it's bigger than, say, the Enlightenment, right? It's bigger than the scientific revolution. The civil rights movement is a social revolution that changed America and continues to change it because the roots and the flowering that comes from it, we can see every day around us. And we see it in the continued struggle. And I think that that is something that we should emphasize. The way that I like to do this is by empowering students and reminding you that the majority of the movements were not done by the wonderful people that we learn about in our history books. The civil rights movement initially was heavily pushed by young people. And it's important to empower young people and to remind them of that. So it is beautiful to learn about Rosa Parks, but let's not forget young Claudette Colvin, who sat down 9 months before Rosa Parks. She was 15 years old, and she was not the person that gets the credit for pushing the Montgomery bus boycott because young Claudette was pregnant. And she was not going to be seen as a suitable face for the civil rights movement. So when Rosa Parks decided to sit down, she was a secretary for the NAACP. She made that choice consciously. She knew she was going to get arrested, and she knew that she was going to push this forward because that was all part of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s civil disobedience and the beliefs of Gandhi that an unjust law is no law at all. And that in order to empower people, we have to remember that just because Jim Crow laws were legislation, that they were not moral laws. And we see this again during the Holocaust. Everything that was done to the Jewish people was lawful. but that was not moral law. So the civil rights movement is these young people, and I emphasize that again, because older Black Americans were not willing in the beginning really to go and start this movement, and through no fault of their own. They had seen people in their youth be lynched for things like walking on the sidewalk and not moving when a white person was in front of them. So of course they're not going to intentionally break laws and bring things down on them. But young people listening to these words were inspired. Claudette Colvin sat down 9 months before Rosa Parks, and she did it during Black History Month because she had just been studying about all these amazing figures. So it's important to inspire and be inspired. I love to talk about Thurgood Marshall. I tell kids that he's my boo, right? He's the first American on the Supreme Court. But before that, he was the attorney that argued Brown versus Board of Education, which allowed for the overturning of Plessy versus Ferguson, which allowed for the integration of schools and allowed for me to teach in a classroom with people of all races. But when Thurgood Marshall won that case at the Supreme Court, the onus fell on children to integrate the schools. So then we have to remember Ruby Bridges, who at 6 years old was the first to integrate elementary schools in New Orleans, Louisiana. That shouldn't have been on the shoulders of a baby, but it was. And they still tried to stop her. She had to pass a test that was above grade level, and she passed that funky little test. And then they had to admit her and still tried to stop her. And then the National Guard had to escort her. And she was by herself. Little Rock 9, those were children, right? So this fell on the shoulders of children to really push this movement forward. And it didn't really get traction until white young people joined as well. When we think about the integration of restaurants, right? And the movement away from the colored section and the white section, I always want to remind people that in itself is why this is American history. It wasn't just Black people that were separated. It was Mexican people, it was Asian people, it was every color that was not white. And again, this fell on the shoulders of young people, young college students and high school students who went and got trained in order to take the physical and social assault that they were going to take by breaking the law intentionally, so that when the newspaper showed up, when the television showed up, it wouldn't be a group of thugs interrupting individuals having a peaceful meal. It was the onus of this immoral law that was still a law. And at that point, that's when America had to look at themselves and they had to decide, which person am I when I watch this? Am I the young Black person that's willing to stand up and take all of this? Am I the older Black person that is not willing and that is scared, that is listening to them tell me that I'm in my place? Am I the white person that's there and uncomfortable but not saying anything? Or am I the white person that is spewing hate? America watched it, and that's when the movement started making traction. And again, that fell on the shoulders of young people. So if anything, I think the number one thing we need to take away is Black history is American history, and social studies is inherently social justice. And this social revolution was pushed forward by the feet of young people. And it will continue to be so.
And that's how it works. Just like that, right? That just like that. And when you said that, Jewel, it really should be Dr. Jewel, because I feel it in you. I feel the passion. Listen, this might be something just trying to remind you of something, but it reminded me of when you see that photo now that they have, which says Ruby Bridges walked so Rosa Parks could sit, so Kamala Harris could run. So now just learning that little information about Claudette Colvin, then it really should read Ruby Bridges walked so Claudette Colvin and Rosa Parks could sit, so Kamala Harris could run. And here we are, because Black history is American history. That's what it's about.
I so appreciate that redirect too of Black history being American history, because I think that's one of the things, I'll speak for Charles and Andrea and myself. We've known that this would be a launching pad to a greater conversation. We knew that February could be utilized as a tool to discussing issues of social justice and equality and race and discrimination and everything else in our American history that needs to be discussed, the discomfort of it, sitting in the discomfort and having these conversations. And so I just really appreciate that redirect, because the last thing I want is for our students, our community, our staff to think that these conversations end with the calendar month of February, because we know that it's just the beginning of larger conversations and larger understanding and growth in our cultural humility and understanding ourselves in relationship with the rest of the world. And so I appreciate both of you redirecting that and rephrasing that, because I think that it's really helpful for me, and I think it's super helpful for other people to hear as well.
Lots of folks disappeared. When you talk about, Dr. Willis talked about her husband coming back and his work and his heroism not being recognized. Muhammad Ali won a gold medal at the Olympics and came back and couldn't buy a sandwich in downtown Louisville, where he was from. Jesse Owens swept the gold medals in 1936 Olympics in Germany, came back and couldn't get a job. He had to race racehorses at state fairs to support himself.
Even though he had a college degree from Ohio State.
Yep. Wasn't recognized, okay, for obvious reasons, okay. We cannot forget that until there's some accountability and a heartfelt apology. And then how do we make it right? This is what you do with family members and loved ones if you have wronged them. Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't know intent versus impact. How can I make it right? Number one, don't ever do it again. Number two, tell everybody you know that that's out of bounds around me and people like me, because it doesn't end with you. If you don't correct and check somebody else, they're going to fall short. And if I'm with you when it happens, I'm looking at you like, come on, we talked about this. Ms. Copeland talks about having accomplices of all backgrounds, and that's what we need. We need Black folks to speak up for gay and lesbian folks, and gay and lesbian folks to speak up for Latinx folks, and Latinx folks to speak up for disabled folks. However this works out, we need everybody's voice top level so that the nonsense is cut down a little bit. And young people, it's your turn.
And unfortunately, the only way to relieve that is to let some of it out and talk. But we all have to be safe enough to speak.
And I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. And people think that freedom of speech means I can say whatever I want. But free speech was originally intended to protect unpopular speech, right? So it's the freedom to say things that not everyone wants to hear, and that's absolutely true. But we're not free from the consequence. And if I can teach anybody anything, it's that you don't have to make yourself smaller for rooms that you've outgrown. You don't have to make yourself smaller to make other people feel comfortable. And that also means my pain. So if I react in pain to something that you said, I should be safe to allow to do that, and then correct it if I go too far. We need to build stamina by building everyone's stamina, including the adult's responsibility to control, to a degree, the environment that allows this to take place. Because children need to be allowed to be children. And correction is love. And safety is love. And if I am not providing that, then how can I expect you to learn anything?
Yeah, there was so many, gosh, I'm going to be sitting on this a lot. I have pages on pages of notes. And I can't thank you all enough for sharing your hearts, sharing your wisdom, being vulnerable, and creating a space that is safe for everybody, letting everyone know that there's space at the table for for them, no matter what race, gender, or how you identify yourself, that this is a conversation that we all need to be having, continuous. It's not just a one time, okay, we did it and we defeated racism, it's over, we can move on. But that it's a place that when we sit in that discomfort, that growth happens, that change happens, and that is the achievement. The achievement is that we're continuing the conversation, not that we've arrived, because I don't know if we ever do arrive.
No, it's never over. It's never over. And one thing I do want to say before I mute myself for the last time, I want to thank Ms. Smith for digging deep and bringing us together and being vulnerable and bringing her concerns forward, because without you, we're not here today. And the fact that you brought this up, it's going to change your children's life path and everyone they talk to, because of the conversation that you've had with them and any pearls that you share with them from this group. So I want to thank you, bottom of my heart.
Absolutely.
I want to thank all of you for just being here and having this conversation. I'm so glad it was able to come together. Like Charles said, a whole bunch of good nuggets. I wish I was taking notes, but I'll get them from Charles.
Yeah.
But yes, thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Ms. Copeland. Thank you, Mr. Love. And thank you, Dr. Willis. I really appreciate all of you.
Well, as always, we just thank all the families that participate in these videos with us. This is not the end of the conversation, it's just the beginning. And so thank you, and hope everyone has a great weekend.